Canada's most critical industries are under siege. Since August 1, 2025, a staggering 35% U.S. tariff on vehicles and auto parts has slammed the brakes on production at giants like General Motors, wiping out thousands of jobs and threatening entire supply chains. And that's just the opening shot. You might think this is just another trade dispute, the kind that makes headlines for a few weeks before fading away. But this one is different. It's a calculated strike at the heart of Canada's industrial base, sending shockwaves through factories, farms, retail shelves, and even high-stakes international talks. In this deep dive, we'll uncover the 5 Canadian sectors taking the hardest hits and reveal how this economic earthquake could shape Canada's future for decades. And trust me, the last sector might be the one you least expect. Before we jump into the specific industries, we need to talk about what really happened here. The media headlines made it sound like one sweeping tariff, but the truth is far more complicated. Washington used a mix of tools to maximize pressure while avoiding a full-scale trade collapse. The first was the now infamous 35% tariff on certain imports, officially justified as part of a crackdown on fentanyl. That explanation raised eyebrows since most fentanyl enters the US through its southern border, not from Canada. The second was a set of targeted tariffs tied to so-called national security concerns. This is where the eye-popping 50% steel and aluminum tariff came from, as well as targeted auto and agricultural duties. Here is the catch. Because of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA, goods that met its rules of origin could avoid the 35% tariff altogether. That meant over 85% of trade between Canada and the US stayed tariff-free. So this was never a total blockade. It was a precision strike aimed at Canada's most vulnerable industries, creating an environment of what some economists are now calling weaponized uncertainty. And no industry felt that more than steel and aluminum. If you want one number to sum up the damage here, it is 50%.
We're going to bring it from 25% to 50%, the tariffs on steel into the United States of America.
We must diversify our trade relationships. And above all, we must rely more on Canadian steel for Canadian projects. And those shifts start today.
On June 4th, 2025, the U.S. doubled its steel and aluminum tariffs from 25% to 50%. For Canada's metal industry, this was not just a challenge, it was an existential threat. In Hamilton, Ontario, ArcelorMittal announced the closure of its wire drawing mill, putting 153 people out of work overnight. A union leader described the tariff as the nail in the coffin for a facility that was already fighting for survival. In Sault Ste. Marie, Algoma Steel laid off dozens and sought a $500 million federal loan to keep the lights on. But here's something you might not expect. Some companies fought back and found ways to survive. Walters Group, a Hamilton steel fabricator that used to send 70% of its output to the US, saw orders evaporate almost instantly. Instead of shutting down, they pivoted to secure big Canadian contracts, including work on the new Calgary Flames arena. They avoided layoffs and proved that diversification can work even under intense pressure. Steel took a massive blow. But if you think that is bad, wait until you see what happened when the auto sector, the lifeblood of Ontario's economy, got hit. This is where the trade war truly exploded. Since August 1st, 2025, vehicles and auto parts that fail to meet USMCA requirements have been subject to a crushing 35% tariff. The timing could not have been worse. In early August, General Motors announced it would suspend production on multiple lines, idling thousands of workers. Its Oshawa plant cut the third shift, directly impacting around 700 employees and indirectly hitting an estimated 1,500 more in the supply chain. Stellantis also faced repeated shutdowns as parts shipments got tangled in tariff red tape. The financial hit was staggering. GM warned of $4 to $5 billion in extra costs for 2025 alone. Ford said it expected nearly $3 billion in added expenses. And here's the kicker. Those costs do not just hurt the companies. They get passed down to consumers. Analysts say the average price of a new car in the US could break $50,000 this year because of these tariffs. Think about that. A trade policy between two countries could raise the price of your next car by thousands. But while auto was the epicenter, the agricultural sector was where the fight turned into a full-blown tit-for-tat battle. When the US slapped tariffs on Canadian beef and canola, Canada did not just sit back. It hit back with its own 25% tariffs on American products like orange juice, peanut butter, wine, and coffee. Suddenly, Canadian consumers saw prices jump on everyday staples, and cross-border supply chains were thrown into chaos. The problem went deeper than sticker shock. Farmers and food processors rely on inputs, fertilizers, seeds, machinery parts that often cross the border multiple times during production. Each crossing meant another tariff hit, a process economists call tariff stacking. The result? Delays, spiraling costs, and an estimated $20 billion in disrupted agricultural trade across North America in 2025. This was more than a market problem. It was a political problem, with farm groups on both sides of the border pressuring their governments to find relief. But before that could happen, the tariffs started hitting consumer goods in ways many people did not see coming. This sector was never the main target, but it got caught in the crossfire. Canadian retaliatory tariffs made American-made appliances, footwear, and cosmetics more expensive. At the same time, Canadian companies that depended on U.S. parts saw costs spike. And when the U.S. expanded tariffs on Chinese goods, it drove up global component prices, making things even worse for Canadian manufacturers. One story says it all. Starfield Optics, a Toronto-based telescope maker, relied on U.S. buyers for most of its sales. After the tariffs hit, their orders vanished. They spent 6 months reworking their entire supply chain to qualify as USMCA compliant. The fix worked, but it came at a massive cost in time and money. These ripple effects showed that no part of the Canadian economy was entirely safe, except for one surprising outlier. You might expect the energy sector to take a big hit too. After all, a 10% tariff on oil and gas was announced early in the dispute. But here is the twist. Almost all Canadian energy exports to the U.S. were exempt under USMCA rules. In June 2025, 99% of Canadian oil crossed the border duty-free. Instead of slowing down, the energy sector actually boomed. Enbridge's mainline pipeline ran at full capacity all year, and demand for Canadian heavy crude from U.S. refineries kept growing. The Cedar LNG export project in British Columbia hit major milestones and is on track to expand Canada's role as an energy supplier to Asia. The reason for this exemption is simple. U.S. refineries are configured to process the heavy crude from Canada's oil sands. Tariffing that supply would have been self-inflicted damage for the American economy, raising gas prices and disrupting domestic refining. So while most sectors scrambled to survive, energy thrived. And that contrast drove home one undeniable truth. Canada needed to change its economic game plan. This trade war did not just inflict damage, it forced a reckoning. For decades, Canada's economy leaned heavily on U.S. trade. Now, with tariffs showing just how dangerous that dependence could be, Ottawa is moving to diversify faster than ever before. New trade agreements are part of the plan. Canada recently wrapped up a free trade deal with Ecuador and is negotiating with the ASEAN bloc, a group of fast-growing Southeast Asian economies. A new $5 billion trade diversification corridor fund is being used to reorient parts, railways, and highways toward overseas markets instead of just the U.S. The most ambitious push is in the electric vehicle supply chain. Canada wants to use its critical mineral reserves, clean energy, and skilled labor to build an end-to-end EV industry, from mining lithium to producing finished cars. Since 2020, more than $46 billion in private investment has flowed in, helped by over $52 billion in government incentives. Honda is committing $15 billion to Ontario, while Volkswagen, Stellantis, and Northvolt are building massive battery plants. It is a huge gamble. If it works, Canada could emerge as a global clean tech leader. If it fails, billions will have been spent without solving the core problem of over-reliance on a single trading partner. The tariffs of 2025 were more than an economic story. They were a stress test for Canada's entire industrial base. Some sectors like energy passed. Others like autos and steel took heavy blows. Agriculture and consumer goods were caught in the middle. And through it all, the country began an urgent transformation that will define its economy for decades. The next big moment comes in July 2026 with the USMCA review. Will it stabilize trade or spark new battles? Let us know below. Hit like and subscribe so you do not miss our next deep dive.